lot of
Right.
people would disagree with you there. What brings you to that conclusion?
Okay, well, firstly, our God is called the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And all Jews agree that it's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Christians agree that this is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because it says so 7 times in the New Testament. And in fact, the lineage of Jesus of Nazareth, if you go to the first gospel, the first chapter, the first page, the very, very first words of the New Testament, it says, these are the generations of Jesus Christ. And then you have 14 generations, 14 generations. And what do you see in the middle there? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of the Muslims is the God of Ishmael, like I said before, the God of war. Ishmael is a man of war. Ishmael, it says in Genesis 16, will be a wild donkey, a wild ass of a man. His hand will be against all his brother's hands, and all his brother's hands will be against his hand, and he will dwell in the face of his brethren. And in chapter 25 of Genesis, it says there, and Ishmael died in the face of his brethren. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. And God says 5 times in Genesis, it is not Ishmael, it is Isaac, through whom the seed of Abraham will be called. So God is very explicit, God is very clear. And God is very clear for the Jew and for the Christian. And like I said earlier before, you know, I love to read the New Testament because the New Testament helps me as a Jew to be a better Jew. It helps me better to focus on what it says in the Old Testament. For example, we have 613 commandments in the Old Testament. Jesus focuses on Mark 12, 28, 31, where he says, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And this is something that every Jew says, morning, day, and night. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment for all Jews. We know it as Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5. Christians know it as Mark 12, 28 to 31. Then there's the second commandment, which is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Jesus teaches this too. Jews know it as Leviticus 19:18. And like I said before, it's Mark 12, 28 to 31. But what Jesus does here is at the very end of verse 31, he says, these are the 2 main commandments. There are no commandments greater than these 2. So what Jesus does is out of the 613, he focuses on the 2 most important commandments. And I agree with the teaching of Jesus that the 2 most important commandments in the whole Torah, to love God and love your fellows and yourself. And guess what? These 2 most important commandments are not in the Quran. And they're not in the Hadith. So what kind of a holy book can the Quran be? If the 2 most important commandments, that there are no commandments greater than these 2, and these 2 commandments do not appear in the Quran. So what kind of a book is the Quran?
So that proves that we have a God of love,
a God of
and
love,
a God of war.
And as for Allah, you see, Muhammad was a camel caravan driver. He worked with the Jews, he worked with the Christians, merchants who were carrying their merchandises all around the ancient world at that time. And he had a neurological condition, like epilepsy. And he used to fall to the ground and have these seizures. And he would froth at the mouth, and he would be choking, and he'd be sweating, and he'd have a fever. And he felt like he was going to die when he had these seizures. And it was during these seizures that Muhammad heard voices. It's a part of the neurological condition. There are doctors today who are neurologists, and they will tell you what Muhammad had. And so he heard voices. By the way, the word in Greek for a voice is a demon, D-E-M-O-N. He heard the demons. And so he thought he was a prophet. So he came to his wife, who he loved very much, and she loved him. And he asked her, am I a prophet or am I mad? Because even in those days, people who heard voices usually were either mad or a prophet. You don't have to be a prophet. The Christians were one people in the eyes of Islam. We are the Ahl el-Kitab. We are the people of the book. So I will create a God greater than their God. In other words, my God, what we'll do is, we will banish 359 pagan gods of Mecca, pagan gods, and we will leave the greatest of the pagan gods, Allah, Al-Ilahi, the moon god, the war god. You notice the moon crescent on top of the mosques. The moon is a very important symbol for Islam because Allah, Al-Ilahi, is based on the moon god, the war god, the sword god. Again, that's why you have the sword on the flag of Saudi Arabia. That's why in Arabic they call their religion, the Muslims call their religion, Din Asif, the religion of the sword. And when they pray, they say, Allahu Akbar. You know, Allahu Akbar. You know, what does that mean, Allahu Akbar? CNN says it means God is great. But that's not what it means. Allahu Akbar